Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma and addiction. My name's Ash and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time. Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today's guest is Sarah Rusbatch. Sarah is a certified health and well-being coach, an accredited grey-area drinking coach, a motivational speaker and a passionate ambassador for helping as many women as possible to live their best lives. Sarah made the decision to get sober in April 2019 and hasn't looked back. Since then, Sarah's sobriety coaching business has helped women all across the globe to ditch the booze and step into a full life of passion, purpose, and alignment. And with that, I'd love to welcome Sarah onto the show. Sarah, welcome to Behind the Smile. How are you today?
I'm really well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's such a pleasure. I'm honoured that you've been able to join us. You're dialing in from the west coast of Australia in sunny Perth.
Yes, absolutely, where it really is very sunny today. I'm having to kind of start thinking about aircon and things like that already, which you don't expect to do in November, but there we go.
No, and then I was sharing with you before we started recording that we're having the opposite problem here in Melbourne, where I'm sitting here wrapped up in a blanket and Ugg boots, and it's meant to be summer tomorrow.
Yeah. I can't believe we're in the same country. It always astonishes me, the size of Australia.
Absolutely. It's so true. Look, Sarah, before we jump into the photo that I've asked you to bring along today, I would love for our listeners to have the opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. So can we start off with you sharing where you're from, where you live now, what your average day looks like, and what do you like to do for fun?
So I am from Manchester in the north of England. I moved to Perth in 2010, so I've been living over here for 12 years now. And came here to escape the cold and the wet of the UK. So we've certainly struck gold with coming to Perth, where the sunshine just seems to be constant. I have two kids who are 11 and 12. So my day involves getting them sorted, as it does with most mums, and then being able to focus on my business. And I work with, as you said, women, mostly women, some men too, all over the world, to help them to create and live a better life without alcohol. So that involves many hats, coaching, which is my favorite, writing, which is my second favorite, and then everything that comes with running a business, which is my least favorite in terms of accounting and admin and all the technical type stuff. But yeah, it's always a busy day, juggling a lot of different things. There's always some exercise thrown in, there's always some yoga thrown in, and there's always some kind of connection with friends, which I would say for me, in terms of what do I do for fun, I have been on such a journey of self-discovery since removing alcohol. And fun for me is so different to what I thought it was. Like initially thinking fun involved a bottle of champagne in the pub, with girlfriends, with the whole afternoon stretching out ahead of you with not a time limit in sight because you could just keep on drinking. Now I actually couldn't think of anything worse. And so for me now, fun, it's time with people I love. It's time in nature. It's trying new things. You've probably seen on my feed, I'm a big fan of ice baths now and infrared saunas and doing all the new things and meeting new people. So I definitely think my life is more diverse and interesting than it ever was.
It sounds amazing. That all sounds like a lot of fun, and I couldn't agree with you more. It's incredible how large the shift in perspective is that we experience when we enter into this life of sobriety. And for me, I went from living what I now see was quite a small, narrow life to a life that's expansive and limitless, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so let's take a look then at the photo you've brought in today. Sarah, I asked you to choose a photo from a time in your life where you were hiding behind a smile. So you were projecting one version of yourself to the world, but the reality was that you were really struggling on the inside. So can you describe for our listeners who can't see the photo right now, what is going on in the photo and also within your life at that time?
So in the photo, I am proudly holding 2 jugs of alcohol with the biggest smile on my face, as I can remember the photo being taken as I walked back from the bar with these 2 big jugs of, I think it was Long Island iced tea, or I always went for the cocktail that had the most number of spirits in it so that I could guarantee being the most drunk. And I was walking back to the table and one of my friends went, smile, and took a photo of me. Behind that smile, there was so much going on. I'd only been in Perth probably about 18 months at that point. I was lonely, I was homesick, I was looking after 2 kids under 2. I was trying to create a life for myself in a new city, and I didn't know how to do it without alcohol. But at the same time, alcohol was really starting to impact me and my drinking had started to change. But I didn't know any other way, and I think we'll talk about that later on. But in terms of that point in my life, the emotions that I was feeling were so deeply uncomfortable, I didn't know any other way to manage them than to drink. And so I just drank, and I drank, and I drank. And this was a picture of me out with some girlfriends drinking, because that was what I did for fun. That's what I thought was fun.
And do you think that anybody around you knew at the time what was really going on for you?
Absolutely not. I don't think I really knew what was going on for me, other than this deep desire for alcohol as often as possible.
It's often the case, isn't it? Alcohol, essentially it disconnects us from self. So our ability to actually check in and know how we're really feeling is so limited when you're essentially using something to get you out of self and to not feel feelings, really. I know that's what it was like for me. All right, so I'd love to take a step back now then. Can you tell me a little bit more about Sarah as a child, what your life looked like growing up?
And it's a huge one, really, because I think when you get sober and when you start doing some digging, you start to kind of reflect on things in such a different way, right?
Absolutely.
I grew up in Scotland, and I was in a family where my parents were not terribly happy together, but they stayed together for the kids, as many parents did. And what that meant was that I was living in a house where there was constant conflict, constant tension. On the surface, to the outside world, we were the perfect family of 4. There was a boy, there was a girl, there was a mum, there was a dad. We went on our nice little holidays. We had a nice house. There was nothing to see here type thing. And behind closed doors, there was a lot of conflict. And what I can see growing up, by the time I was 12, I'd been to 5 different schools. We had moved around quite a lot because of my dad's job. And I craved connection. Like Sarah, as a young girl, she just was never happier than when she had lots of people around her. And maybe that was, looking back, in some way reflective of what was happening at home with mum and dad, and not having that true sense of safety at home. So feeling that sense of safety that I sought from being in big groups. And so I'm such a girl's girl. I just had to surround myself with girlfriends all the time, and even as a younger girl. And then when I was 13, we moved to Manchester from Scotland, which was a really difficult age to move, to go from Scotland to England. I had a very strong Scottish accent, and I moved to England, and the Scots and the English hate each other. So it was kind of like, who's this Scottish girl coming into our school? And it was really hard. And then at 14, I discovered alcohol. And at 14, then I discovered a way, first of all, to feel like I fitted in. Because Ash, what I loved about alcohol was that I could fast track feeling connected to people and close to people. When you've had a bottle of wine with someone and you're like, oh my God, you're my best friend. I love you. That was all I wanted. That was all I ever wanted, was to feel connection, to feel love, to feel like people love me and I love them. And so what I loved about alcohol was it fast-tracked that for me. So I could be sat with a group of girls who I didn't really know that well, and within an hour of drinking, we would love each other. Like, they were my best friends, and that was all I ever wanted. And so alcohol became, for me, something that created that sense of connection that I was so deeply craving.
Do you remember the first time you tried alcohol?
No, I can't remember the first time. I remember the first time drinking on my own without my parents. But I mean, my dad was an alcoholic. I grew up, alcohol was very prevalent in my house growing up. My dad was not a bad drunk. He wasn't a violent drunk. He just drank a lot. And so, and I remember as a little girl seeing my mum and dad have an argument and seeing my dad go straight to the drinks cabinet and pouring himself a whiskey. And, you know, monkey see, monkey do, right? And so I remember the first time I had an argument with a boyfriend, first thing I did was go to the drinks cabinet and pour myself a whiskey. I can remember that burning sensation in my throat, but just going, well, that's what dad did, so that must be what works. But prior to that, I definitely, like, from the age of probably 6 or 7, was given, like, the froth off the top of my dad's pint of Guinness or bitter or whatever. I had a grandmother that lived in the south of France who was an alcoholic also. And so she would think nothing at the age of 10 or 11 of me having a small glass of wine with dinner. That was just kind of how it was. And then at like that kind of age, 14, 15, we used to fill up bottles of Soda Stream with whatever we could find in the drinks cabinet, top it up with a little bit of Coke, go down the local park and just drink these disgusting concoctions of like Cinzano and Southern Comfort and Malibu and Bacardi and vodka all mixed together. And then you'd go and like snog the local boys from around the corner, and then you'd go home, and that was like our initiation into those older years, right? At age 14, 15. Is that just the UK, or is that what it was like for you guys?
You've just told my story. To a T, I'm pretty sure I remember doing the exact same thing with my girlfriends and the snogging and all of it.
Yeah.
It was just what we did, absolutely.
Yeah.
So can you describe for me then, what did your drinking look like as a teenager?
It was heavy. It was consistent. It was something I looked forward to. It never even occurred to me that I wouldn't drink. Like, we had a house that was very sociable. Mum and dad always having dinner parties, always having people over. It was very common for there to just be lots of raucous laughter coming from the living room and drunk adults, but always with that fun element. I just associated that alcohol meant fun and it meant connection. So of course, by the time I discovered it, I was like, well, yeah, of course I'm going to drink. And of course it's going to give me all the things that I want it to. So through those teenage years, I drank a lot. Never on my own. Like, you know, it was a social thing. You kind of surround yourself with other people that drink in the same way. This was an era where there was a lot of recreational drugs around at the time as well. So there was just a lot of hedonism. There was just, and I naturally gravitated I went to an all-girls school. And I think it's just the way it happens. You gravitate towards others that perhaps are having the same issues at home as you are. And so you create your kind of little bond. Like, I remember there being 3 or 4 of us who were so close and so tight. And all of us either had separated parents or very unhappy parents. There was a lot of arguments at home. It wasn't a pleasant place to be. So we were just drawn together and we just went and partied and drank. And we were doing things that were well beyond our years. But also this was a time where you were given a lot of freedom. You know, as a 16, 17-year-old, my parents had no idea where I was. I was going out to pubs, I was taking fake ID, I was getting home at midnight. Like, it was just very, very common. And then 18 in the UK, it's kind of a rite of passage. Everyone leaves home and goes straight to university in another town. So straight into, but of course, coming back to what I knew was, how do you make friends? How do you fast track friendship? You get drunk with everyone and then everyone's your best friend. And so that was what I did. And so university is just 3 years of alcohol, drugs, and a little bit of study. And then at 21, moved to London. I got my first job in recruitment, where the 4th interview, I had 4 stages of interview, Ash, and the 4th one was in a pub doing shots of Sambuca to see how well I could handle my booze.
Oh my gosh.
There you go. That's the 1997 in London, where you got your job based on your drinking ability.
Wow. I can't imagine that flying these days.
No, nor could I. But that was, and needless to say, I passed with flying colours. And so I was well practised at this. And so then you're kind of in London in your early 20s, earning money for the first time. Your role models are like Samantha from Sex and the City, who's drinking cosmopolitans and sleeping her way around town. And you feel sophisticated and you think that you are living the high life and you are batching the boys pint for pint and drink for drink. And so, again, alcohol was everywhere, but never in a way that seemed problematic, because everyone was drinking. We would think nothing of getting home at 2 a.m. and being back on the tube going back to work at 7 a.m. Like, that was just 2 or 3 nights a week. And God knows how we managed it. But, you know, you'd have a bacon butty and a cup of tea and you'd be fine and ready to do it again the next night. And so that was like the 20s as well. But again, I don't really recall drinking on my own at that point. I drank socially, but I just socialized a lot. But on the nights that I was at home, I was generally recovering, and that was my night off. And so that was the night I went to the gym and I had my kale smoothies and I did all the things that made me think I had balance in my life.
Oh my gosh, I'm nodding away here. Just again, so the similarities are blowing my mind, but that's what we do, isn't it?
Yeah.
To convince ourselves that what we're doing is normal. And I think you touch on a really important point as well, in that you surround yourself with people that do the same. So there's no reference point to think otherwise, which is really interesting.
If you ever say to someone, "Oh, I'm worried about my drinking," you drink the same as them. So their first response is, "Oh, you're fine, don't be silly."
Absolutely. So you started working in recruitment in London, you're in your 20s. Did your drinking start to impact your productivity or your output or your career at that point?
I was about to say no then, but actually I do recall my manager at the time saying to me, "Sarah, you have got so much potential and you are doing so well in this business, but there's a really big red flag about your drinking." Not because my drinking was causing me not to perform, but because at all these work events, I would just make a complete dick of myself. Like, I was always the one that was really drunk, that was either saying something really inappropriate or was kissing someone I really shouldn't have been kissing, or you know, just those silly things that you do when you're drinking. And other people seemed to have an off button, but I just never did. And there was always a story about me on a Monday morning. And my manager was like, "You're brilliant at your job, you're brilliant at what you do, but we can't promote you to being a manager when every Monday morning, I don't know what story I'm going to hear about you." And I just remember being a bit like, "But it's not affecting my job. I'm still doing really well. I'm the biggest biller in the company. I'm making you the most money. My productivity is still high." But of course, I wasn't a role model to junior people coming into the business when I was rolling around drunk most weekends and most Friday drinks evenings. And I would always plan a client lunch for a Friday so that I could start at 12. So by the time it was the time for work drinks at 5:30, I was absolutely smashed. And they were only just having their first one and I was 2 bottles in. And so the secrets that I used to tell and the things that, you know, anyway, we know what alcohol makes us do. And so that was definitely something, not in terms of productivity, but in terms of my reputation.
And so then when did alcohol start to become a problem? When did this progressive nature start to take hold for you?
So I'd met my husband and we got married, and he's from New Zealand, and we were trying to get pregnant. And turns out that when you're doing loads of drugs and drinking loads, that trying to get pregnant is quite difficult. But
Can be challenging.
Right, but nobody even said to me, "How much are you drinking?" You know, like it just wasn't even coming up when I was talking to doctors, or they maybe said you should cut down a little bit. But it wasn't, like, I think nowadays, if you were trying to get pregnant, everybody would kind of know, yeah, right, of course you need to not be drinking and smoking. But back then it kind of wasn't talked about as much. We did eventually get pregnant, and through fertility treatment, and it wasn't even an issue for me not to drink. Like I was so desperate to be pregnant that I embraced pregnancy and loved it. And then I had my son, and my husband said, "I don't want to stay in the UK anymore. I want to bring up our son with the lifestyle that I had growing up of beach cricket and afternoon swims and outdoor lifestyle. I don't want him growing up in central London where every run you go for, you're dodging the syringes in the local park." And, you know, it was a very different lifestyle. So we agreed to move to Australia. We decided Australia as kind of like a central place. It wasn't New Zealand, it wasn't the UK. We would start all over again, which in hindsight was stupid, because who moves somewhere with a newborn baby where they've got no friends, no family, no support network, and thinks they're going to be okay? But I was just like, yeah, I'll be fine. I've always made friends, so I'll be able to make friends absolutely fine. I'm an outgoing, friendly person. 2 weeks after we landed in Perth, I got pregnant. And so then all of a sudden I was in a new city, and the one way that I'd always had of making friends, which was drinking, I couldn't do because I was pregnant. So I didn't know what it was like to have friendships that formed slowly and normally and gradually in the way that friendships do. I was you're my best friend within 10 minutes. And so what do you mean you don't want my phone number and you're not inviting me out straight away? Like, I remember it being so difficult. I remember talking to one of my friends in the UK and being like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Nobody seems to want to be my friend. But they did. They just were like taking it slow, as normal people do. And so I then had 2 under 2. I had no friends, no family. My husband was out working all day. I missed my work. Like, I, at this point, was still working in recruitment. I'd become director of a very successful family-run business. And I was constantly, my life had been weekends in Saint-Tropez and weekends in New York and doing the high life and having disposable income and being able to do what I wanted when I wanted. And all of a sudden, everything was different. I couldn't even go for a wee without a child coming with me. Like, it was kind of like everything in my life was upside down. I was spending days pureeing carrot and going to baby rhyme time and struggling with sleep and struggling with 2 very demanding little people and not even knowing who I was anymore. And alcohol then was like, hi, I'm here. You feel better when you have me. And so I didn't need to be told twice that I deserved that glass of wine at the end of the day, or that mummy wine juice was what I needed. And so I started drinking alone, and I started looking forward to drinking. It was something that I wanted more and more. I remember I would never drink with the kids, but as soon as I would hear my husband's truck pull into the driveway, I would go outside with 2 screaming kids. I would hand them to him, and I would go inside, get my wine, and go and sit in a little quiet corner in the garden and just drink. Just drink with the sole purpose of escapism. And that photo that was taken was around that time where I had found a group of friends, and I was drinking now so I could make friends, and that connection was what I wanted and needed, but I wasn't happy. I knew that that something wasn't right within me, and that was when the drinking, it wasn't something that I was doing socially anymore. It was something I was doing to escape myself.
It just makes me think it must have been such a confusing time to feel so isolated and lonely. But at the same time, you've got 2 children there. And whilst that would be so fulfilling and motherhood is such a beautiful experience for so many people, there's that real confusion there where there's that loss of identity, there's that loneliness and that disconnection.
And no one really prepares you or talks about that in early motherhood, of what it's like to not be working anymore and not have complete independence anymore. And don't get me wrong, like, I loved and still love being a mum. Like, my kids are my proudest achievement and I have such a strong relationship with them. But it was still a mourning and a grief for a life that you would never have again, of just flippantly being able to go, oh, do you want to go out for dinner tonight? Yeah, sure. Like, just this being able to have that impulsivity and that independence. And I just missed as well that sense of purpose each day, of that sense of achievement. I'm quite a driven person, quite type A. I need my list of jobs to do every day and I tick them off and it makes me feel good. And working in recruitment, there's a never-ending list of jobs to do. So it suited me so well. And I remember when I had William, and I used to wake up in the morning and go, right, I've got to create a list. So I'd be like, put washing in washing machine, take washing out of washing machine, put washing online, just so I had a sense of achievement of getting my highlighter out and being able to go, I've done that and I've done that.
Yeah, I'm exactly the same. Love a list, love marking a list off. Oh gosh. So you went through this period of time where you started to drink alone in the garden. And were you drinking to blackout at this stage, or were you able to put the cap back on the bottle? What did it look like?
It was just a really slow, gradual increase. And that's the thing about alcohol. It's like, people talk to me about what's grey area drinking and what's an alcoholic. And I'm like, but where's the line of when someone goes from being a drinker to being an alcoholic? Like, it's so subtle and so insidious in the way that it starts to build up. And I never defined myself as an alcoholic, ever. But I had a problem with drinking. And I was definitely addicted. Like, definitely, like addiction, when we crave something and we struggle to give it up. But society is so okay with certain addictions and not with others. It's okay to say I'm addicted to caffeine. That's absolutely fine. But to say I'm addicted to alcohol, oh no, you terrible person, shame on you for becoming addicted to that highly addictive substance. And so I felt ashamed that I was drinking. I was hiding it, but I was also in denial. And I also had very strong rules, and I didn't drink on a Monday and Tuesday. And if I didn't drink on a Monday and Tuesday, I wasn't an alcoholic. Although there was obviously a few Mondays where that did happen. And I remember on the Mondays that I did drink, my husband used to take the kids to cricket training on a Monday night. By this point, the kids were like 4 and 6. And I remember I used to have this bottle that I hid behind all the other bottles of olive oil and coconut oil and everything in the pantry. There'd be a bottle of red wine. Because I couldn't ever keep white wine in the fridge because I would just drink it. And then my theory was, well, if it's warm, I won't drink it. But then I forgot about red, and you can drink red at any temperature. So there was always red in the house somewhere. And I would keep this bottle hidden behind the olive oils and all of that. And I would pour it into a mug so that I wasn't making a ritual of it. And I would drink it in the pantry so that it wasn't an occasion, but it was just something I was doing sneakily. And then I would pretend that I hadn't had anything when the kids got home, when Gus got home. And so it was definitely building up into that kind of drinking, but still with rules, and still high functioning, incredibly high functioning. I was still running half marathons. By this point, I had my own recruitment business, and I was successful. I was making good money. But the problem is, when you're working for yourself, of course, there's no boundaries. I was working from home. I didn't have to be anywhere. So I would get up, get the kids to school. And some days, depending on how bad the hangover was, I would either work or I would go back to bed and play Candy Crush all day. And it's soul destroying. Like, like for someone who's very driven and very passionate, to have a day, on a beautiful hot sunny day where you can't even have the curtains open because that piercing sunlight is just too much, to have to lie in bed with all you can do is play Candy Crush or scroll Facebook, it just kills your soul, and you hate yourself. And I would be like, I'm definitely not drinking today. Definitely not drinking today. But then by 5 o'clock, it was there. And before I knew it, there was a glass in my hand. And it just continued. And then a bottle wasn't enough. And then sometimes I'd find myself opening the second bottle. But it got to the point where my sleep was so impacted. So then I started taking sleeping tablets every time I drank so that I didn't get the 3 a.m. wake up. And so you can imagine what it's like when you wake up in the morning having had a bottle of wine and a sleeping tablet. You're definitely not showing up as the best version of you, right?
Yeah, absolutely not.
Anxiety was getting worse. And I'm not an anxious person at all. And yet I was overthinking, I was worrying, I was wondering what people were thinking about me, what they were saying about me. I was often drinking and not being able to remember much the next day. And I went to my GP. I was like, I'm a mess, I'm a shell of myself. But at no point did she say to me, how much are you drinking? But then happily gave me a script for anti-anxiety meds. There was just something in me that was like, that's not the answer here. You know enough, Sarah, to know that there's more going on here. And while I didn't think everything was down to alcohol, I knew I needed to take a break. There'd been a couple of incidents. There'd been a falling over and smashing my face. There'd been a time when I couldn't take my son to his cricket match because I was still pissed at 8 o'clock in the morning. And when you can't take your son to the thing he loves most in the world because his mum is still over the limit at 8 in the morning, it was really an eye-opener for me. So I said, that's it, I'm going to do 21 days. I'm going to take 3 weeks off. So this was...
Why 21 days?
Oh, I think I'd read that that's how long it takes to break a habit. To me, this was just a bad habit. Like, it's just a bad habit that just needed to be broken. I didn't have the information that I have now about addiction, about the neuroscience, about any of that. I was just like, oh, Sarah, you've got into a bad habit with your drinking. Maybe we'll just take a bit of a break. So this was 2017, and there wasn't a huge amount of information out there like there is now. So I took 21 days off, and I think I read the Annie Grace book, This Naked Mind, and I was like, wow, goodness, oh my goodness. And everything I was reading was just, I was fascinated by. And it got to the 21 days and I was like, no, I'm going to keep going. I'm feeling really good. And so I did 100 days. And then I was like, oh, well, I can't not drink again. Like, that would just be weird. So it's all okay. Now I'll be a moderate, normal drinker. And now I'll just drink every now and then like other people. And everything's fixed now. And so I drank. And the first time, I remember being in a restaurant, I had 1 glass of wine. I was like, oh, look at me. Look how grown up I am now.
I'm cured.
I'm just fixed now. Look, I'm just a 1 glass kind of girl. Within 2 weeks, I was back to how I had been before.
You do hear that. I hear that story shared time and time again, is that sometimes we can have a break, but when we do finally return, there'll be a period of maybe, as you said, a week or two, if we're lucky, where we'll convince ourselves that everything's fine because we're all of a sudden able to manage it again. But then it's been shared with me that you then go back to exactly how it was, if not worse.
If not
and
worse.
again, that's that progressive nature. So would you say that you had a specific rock bottom, or was it more of those incidences that were compounding for you?
It was compounding incidents. The face planting one was definitely, I'd never injured myself before. And that was the first time that I'd caused a physical injury. And I had gone outside at a 40th birthday party to put out a cigarette. And I crouched down and I toppled forwards. But because I didn't have any reflexes, I didn't put my hands out. So I just landed on a concrete driveway on my face. So blood everywhere. Like the shame that I felt. I woke up my friend took me home and put me to bed. And I woke up the next morning to my 5-year-old daughter standing next to me going, "Mummy, what happened to your face?" And I just, that sick feeling where suddenly you remember everything from the night before and you're just filled with such shame. And even that night, I can remember being hungover to hell, having like cuts and bruises. My lips were 3 times their size with just like bruises all over them. I couldn't even drink out of a glass. So I drank wine through a straw because I didn't know any other way of how to make the feelings go away. That was a moment of going, the thing that caused this to happen, I'm still doing it the next day.
Just not that inability to let it go. What was your husband saying to you at this time?
So he was a big drinker too. So we were each other's enablers. He had started to make comments along the lines of, "You just need to rein it in a bit, Sarah. Like, you're just going too far." And for him to say that was quite a big thing because he never commented on my drinking. And that night, and I remember the shame of going to the chemist on Monday morning and asking the pharmacist, what does she have to help all the things on my face? And she surreptitiously handed me a card for domestic violence. And the way I felt in that moment was like my husband wouldn't hurt a fly. And how that made me feel in that moment of her thinking I'd been beaten up by my husband was just, that was a rock bottom.
That would have been really tough. Oh gosh. So tell me more then about the day you woke up and decided today is the day I become a sober person for good.
So I made the plan 3 months before it happened.
Wow.
So, no, 2 months before. So after going back to drinking after 100 days, kept taking breaks, going back to drinking, 2 years of this constant merry-go-round cycle. And then one day saying, I'm going to do 6 months next time. I'd never done 6 months. And telling my friend, who was now sober, a sober friend that I'd made, sent her a message and I said, I'm going to do 6 months next time. Because that, I'm going to set the date and that's it, because I'm just drinking too much again. And she went, Sarah, why is 6 months going to be any different? Like, setting these time limits, you're still beholden to alcohol. You're still saying, I'm going to go back to it, when you know that everything in your life is better when you don't drink. And that moment when she said that to me, and I was just like, she's so right. And that was just the moment of going, everything is better when I don't drink. My life, my friendships, my relationship with my kids, my energy, my mood, my emotions, my self-talk, everything was better every time I didn't drink. But I still kept going back to it. And then it was just that penny dropping moment of going, but what about if I don't go back to it? And so I set the date and I said, I'm going to be done. I know that that's going to be it. And it was 2 months later, it was the 27th of April, 2019, and I set this date in February. And it was a friend's 40th, and I thought, this is going to be my last hurrah. I had my hair and makeup done, I had a new outfit, I was like, I'm going out in style, this is my last night of boozing. I went home at 10 o'clock, I had 2 drinks.
You're kidding me.
I was just done.
You were done.
I was so ready. And I remember waking up the next day and going, welcome to the rest of your life, Sarah.
Incredible. What were those first 6 weeks like for you? What did they look like? And did you have any sort of tools or techniques that you were implementing to help support your sobriety?
Because I'd done a couple of times before of doing 100 days, I knew what I was letting myself in for. So I was really well prepared. And I knew that what I had to do was, number one, stay inspired. I'm a reader. I needed to have the whole 5 books ready to just work my way through. I needed to have podcasts for every single walk that I went on. I needed to have exercise as a focus. I needed to make sure that I still had friendships and connection with friends booked in, but in a way that wasn't focused around alcohol. And for me, I also knew that I was going to not go down the sugar path, because I'd done that twice before. And I knew that when I removed alcohol, that I would just be gorging on sugar, but I knew that that didn't make me feel good. So I had also made the decision, not that I'm going to remove sugar completely, but I made the decision. I think I may have even signed up to a challenge at the gym or just something. So my focus was exercise, eating really well, losing a couple of kilos, and just having that as my focus.
What a great idea. It sounds like you were really well supported in all facets. You make such a good point about when we put down alcohol, often we'll naturally pick up other things. It's just so common. I know that I've done everything you can imagine in my early sobriety. And I'm only now just at, coming on to 3 years, learning to be able to actually just sit with my emotions and not need to use any of those external things to replace what alcohol used to do for me. What was going through your head when you were in that pre-contemplation? Like, what did you have any fears around giving up alcohol?
Honestly, no, because I'd done it. I had the evidence. I had the evidence that I couldn't moderate, and I had the evidence that I felt a million times better when I removed alcohol. So if anything, I felt excited. I felt excited for the next stage of my life. It really did feel like a rite of passage, kind of like I'm done. I can't moderate. I have tried for 2 years and I cannot do it. And so I don't need to put myself through that anymore.
And for somebody who drinks like you or I used to drink, moderation just is torture. Can you talk a little bit more about that? And why do you think complete abstinence is the much easier pathway compared to moderation?
I never drank to enjoy the taste of a fine wine with my steak or I mean, I may have said that I did, but mostly I drank to get drunk, right? And so to get a taster, but not be able to go the whole way, that was just absolute torture for me. And what I now also know is when the neurological impact of having alcohol come into our brain and the mess up of the neurotransmitters and how imbalanced they make us. So when we drink alcohol, we get a sudden surge of GABA. So GABA is the neurotransmitter that makes us feel calm and relaxed. So that's why it's a depressant, right? So that's why in that moment you go, and you just, all your problems seem to melt away, which is why we drink, right? Because in the short term, it does what we want it to do. That lasts about 20 minutes. Because our beautiful brain hates the lack of homeostasis, what it does is it releases loads of cortisol, the stress hormone, to counter the impact of the big hit of GABA. So once the alcohol's worn off, all we're left is a feeling of excess cortisol, which makes us feel a bit edgy, a bit stressed, a bit anxious. And so then we crave another drink to get rid of the impact that the first drink has caused. So for me, after one glass, I would feel really antsy after it had worn off. Really antsy. Like, to me, going out for a lunchtime drinks and having to stop, that was my idea of hell. Because the way I would feel for the rest of the afternoon would be on edge, just not quite myself, just not right in my own skin. And I just wanted to keep drinking. And now I know why that is, with that neurological impact and what happens to our neurotransmitters. So when we don't mess up that homeostasis balance of neurotransmitters, we're not fighting against anything. So now understanding all of this helps me to go, so that's why 1 or 2 was never really an option for me.
I love the way you've explained that so clearly. And it's also a contributing factor to why alcohol causes anxiety. And when I started to realize that, because I developed chronic anxiety towards the end of my drinking, particularly in the last 2 years, which is no surprise, that's when I was a daily drinker. And I was on antidepressants to try and medicate the anxiety, which I later learned essentially they were just being neutralized by the alcohol. But it was this vicious cycle of I would drink because I felt anxious, but then the drinking made me feel anxious. And until you break that cycle, you can't escape from that loop.
Exactly. And It's the biggest myth about alcohol is that it relaxes us, because it does for 20 minutes. But then it leaves us feeling more stressed and anxious. And with my clients, the number one thing that they notice is how quickly their anxiety decreases.
Absolutely. And sleep as well. I know that for me, the way I sleep now compared to when I used to drink, and you mentioned those 3 a.m. wake ups, there's just so much evidence in how our well-being is significantly improved, correlated to the quality of sleep that we get. And again, alcohol inhibits that ability to get a full night's rest.
Exactly.
So tell me, how has your life changed since you got sober?
So the first year I was still working in recruitment, but another reason that I think I'd been drinking so much was because I was so unfulfilled in my job. I'd done it for 24 years. I was kind of like, I'm done from doing this all the time. But it was great on paper. I had flexible hours. I worked for myself. I made great money, and I could come and go as I pleased. And so to most people looking at that, you'd be like, well, what are you moaning about? That's the dream. But for me, it was just killing my soul inside. I didn't feel fulfilled or on purpose with it whatsoever. And I'd always had an interest in coaching. I mean, recruitment is very much career coaching. And I was like, well, what about if I was to flip that to do health coaching? Because I've been on this journey myself of, becoming more interested in health and well-being, but I was very resistant to it being alcohol related. So 2020 happened, COVID happened, and it kind of made the decision for me, because my recruitment business had gone on hold because I was doing legal recruitment at the time and no law firms were hiring. Everyone was kind of, not knowing what the future held from a COVID standpoint. So I had no work to do. So I was like, well, I might as well retrain. So I did my health and wellness qualification in 2020 while still doing an incredible amount of work on myself. I was seeing a therapist weekly. I was digging out some of the stuff from my past that had kind of got me to that point. I was starting to become so much more self-aware, so much more self-connected. And then at the end of 2020, my teacher said to me, so what's your focus going to be? You've qualified now, you've passed with like absolute distinction in health and wellness coaching, but you need to niche. What are you going to do? And I was like, I don't know whether to do the alcohol. And then I was like, but that's my story, and that's what I'm so passionate about, and that's what I love helping others with. And so I launched the business and I then went on to study and get my grey-area drinking qualification, because what I focus on with my clients is, if you're taking alcohol out, what are you adding in? Because you can't just take alcohol out and carry on living exactly the same life that you had without having something that you add in, whether that be from a nervous system regulation perspective, if you're drinking for stress and anxiety, whether that be from creating more fulfillment if you're drinking because you're bored and lonely, whether that be like whatever the reasons are. When we identify what the reasons are, we then need to look at what we're using instead of alcohol. And so it then coincided, March 21, Mamma Mia interviewed me. And they ran an article sharing my story. 8,000 women reached out to me after reading that story.
Wow.
And what that did was show me there are so many women out there who are struggling in the way that I have been struggling. They don't identify as being alcoholics, but their drinking is slowly but surely increasing. It's really starting to impact their mental well-being, their physical health. They aren't telling anyone about it. They're filled with shame, remorse, and regret. And so I created my community, a free Facebook community that's now got 13,000 women in it from all over the world. And I started coaching, and I run alcohol-free programs. And most of the work I do, I don't do one-to-one. I do have some one-to-one clients, but most of it I do in groups, because the opposite of addiction is connection. And when we are going on that journey, they say that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. If you are spending all of your time still with people who are drinking all the time, it's really hard. If you are in a group with others who are all doing this at the same time, you feed off each other, you inspire each other, you share with each other. And I'm so much about people getting that support and connection with others as well as me.
It's so important, isn't it? So can you define what grey area drinking is for those who maybe haven't heard the term before?
So if you think about someone's drinking as being on a scale of 1 to 10. So 1 is someone who either doesn't drink, or maybe they have a glass of champagne at a wedding to toast the bride and groom. And other than that, alcohol just doesn't feature. 10 is an end stage physically dependent alcoholic. And what I mean by that is someone who needs to have medical support to stop drinking, otherwise they could die, because it's really important to mention here that there are only 3 substances in the world that the human body can die from withdrawal from, and alcohol is one of them. One of the others is illegal, and the other one you can only get given from a healthcare practitioner in certain amounts, very, very closely monitored amounts at any one time. And yet alcohol is available to all of us everywhere, and encouraged that we have. So you've got 1 in 10. Someone that needs medical support to stop drinking, and someone who never drinks. To me, the grey area is about a 4 to an 8. So we're not using alcohol, or we're using alcohol as something other than just something we do to have a nice glass of wine with our meal. It's become something that we're becoming dependent on, because that person who's a 10, they don't wake up a 10. No. They move through the scale. And that's why we can't use the term alcoholic and social drinker anymore, because it's a scale. In the UK, they use the term alcohol use disorder. In the States, they're starting to use grey area drinking more, which again is a term that's just becoming more openly talked about, where you've got a dysfunction in some way with alcohol, but you're not needing and wanting to drink every single day, which is what we consider an alcoholic to be.
And do you think that the solution for somebody who identifies as a grey area drinker is abstinence, or do you think that there can be a world where they drink on occasion?
I think it depends on the reasons and where you were at. Some people are drinking situationally. So they've had an incredibly difficult event and they haven't known how to process that, and they have needed and wanted escape from it. And they have drank significantly through that time, and maybe then have developed a problematic relationship with alcohol and carried on. But when you deal with the heart of the problem and you take a significant break from alcohol, perhaps they could go back to being a moderate drinker. But I would say the majority of people can't. I think there's a line, and I remember listening to someone talk about this. When you've passed the point of being a take it or leave it drinker, so when you've passed that point of being someone that's just like, oh yeah, I don't really mind if I drink tonight or not. I'm happy to drive if you want to drink. I was never that person, by the way. I was never the driver. And so when you have passed the line of being a take it or leave it drinker, then you're never going to go back to being a take it or leave it drinker. Like, the scale doesn't go down in the same way that it goes up. So I say to everyone, give yourself the opportunity of taking a break. Take a decent amount of time off alcohol and then see how you feel. Because most people don't know what their life is like without alcohol, because it's been prevalent in their life since they were 14, 15 years old. And it's inconceivable for them to even think about what 3 months off alcohol might be like. But what's 3 months in your one long, amazing, precious life? When you start to get it into context. And what if you discover stuff about yourself or a different way to be that you wouldn't know if you carried on drinking?
Absolutely. Now, I hear a lot of people say, it's quite a common phrase in Australia is, I need a drink, or I need a drink to unwind. And as you mentioned, alcohol is a depressant that actually increases anxiety. So if we're working off your model of implementing things once we've replaced the alcohol, or removed the alcohol, I should say, what are some tips that you might have for people who want to de-stress without using alcohol?
Yeah, and that's a great point. And that's the part of my job that I love the most, is doing this kind of work with my clients. So the first thing I do is a neurotransmitter assessment to see if they are deficient in GABA. I test for 4 different neurotransmitters: GABA, serotonin, dopamine, and acetylcholine. And depending on where they are on that scale, and if they're deficient in, then we can look at certain supplements, nutrition, and lifestyle activities that start to build GABA naturally. I'd say 80% of the women I work with are deficient in GABA. And that's why we're turning to alcohol, because GABA is the body's natural way of feeling calm. So if we're not producing enough of that ourselves, we're going to turn to something externally to do it for us. So with number one place I start is, let's start rebuilding your GABA. Second thing is, let's start regulating your nervous system. So let's start looking at what are the things for you that start to bring you down, because it's different for everyone. One client loves journaling, Another can't bear to put pen to paper, but loves listening to calming music while going for a walk. Another client uses essential oils, and she finds the sense of smell so incredibly powerful. Another client has started, running all the time. Like it's about trial and error, and this is the exciting, fun bit where you get to experiment with, well, what works for me? In the early days of sobriety, for me, every single night at 5 o'clock, I had a bath. I'm a Pisces. I'm such a water girl. I'm drawn to water. Water instantly calms me. So I had to be out of the kitchen. So I had a bath every night at 5 o'clock, and that's what worked for me. Other people are like, oh my God, you lie in dirty water. That's disgusting. I can't have a bath. But they will go and do a meditation on the bed, or they'll go, it's all about discovering what works for you. But most of us don't even know, because we're so disconnected to ourselves that we wouldn't even know what works for us.
I'm a huge fan of baths, and I love the idea of doing one every day at 5 p.m. That's a great suggestion, Sarah.
Yes.
Okay, so we've just ticked over into December, which for a lot of people marks the beginning of the silly season. And it can be a really challenging time for someone if they're either trying to give up alcohol or maybe they're early on in their sobriety journey. So what tips can you share with us for staying sober over this period?
I think it's really important that we're very selective with what we do. There's a general kind of propensity to just say yes to everything, and there's all these invites and all these people that suddenly want to catch up that you don't even really like that much and can't be bothered spending time with, but because it's Christmas we must catch up. So just get really clear on who you want to spend time with and what you want to do, and make sure that you have not got a diary ahead of you that is involving 5 nights in a row out doing something, because that's going to leave you feeling stressed and exhausted. So number one is really ask yourself, do I really want to do this? If it's not a hell yes, then it's a hell no. Second thing is consider yourself as having a bucket, and your bucket is your energy levels. And every time you do something or get or expel a certain amount of energy, we need to find ways that replenish it. So what are you doing in your day or in your week that really kind of starts to replenish that bucket for you? Is it having an afternoon to yourself? Is it a walk on the beach? Is it seeing a certain friend that really fills your cup and makes you feel great? Is it having absolute solitude for a day and not speaking to anyone and completely being able to just read a book and be on your own? Like, know what fills your bucket back up, because at this time of year, our bucket gets empty. And we're very rarely doing enough to keep filling it up. And then when we're tired, exhausted, stressed and overwhelmed, alcohol feels like a really quick fix. Third thing, alcohol-free drinks. They're not for everyone, but for me, keep the ritual, change the ingredient. If an alcohol-free drink at 5 o'clock on a Friday in a nice champagne glass works for you, do it. I don't drink them that much, but if I'm going to a social occasion, I'll take a nice bottle of alcohol-free champagne with me. I enjoy the taste of it. I'm pretty sick of water sometimes, and so it's nice to have a few different options. And then just make sure that you are staying inspired. So staying, if you're on social media, on Instagram, following your favorite sober people, joining communities like mine or any of the other amazing ones out there, listening to the podcast, reading the books, like staying focused, because that's when we get complacent is when we slip up. So staying, and the way that we stay focused is by continually staying inspired.
That's absolutely right. I was sharing on this recently, preparation is key. Preparation prevents piss poor performance. I learned once upon a time in a previous life, and it's so true. If you can go in with a game plan, you're just so much more supported, especially, if a trigger does come up that you're not expecting, or somebody offers you a drink, just having those tools in your toolkit to better prepare you. So thank you for sharing those, Sarah. That's really helpful for our audience. Now, I'd love to know what the future holds. I know that there's some exciting things on the way for you. Can you share any of those with us today?
So I've just run my first corporate alcohol-free program for a huge mining company here in Western Australia. They, I would love to get into more corporates. Like, so many corporates out there are waxing lyrical about, we support our employees with mental health, and yet every social event they do is in the pub, and there's no alcohol-free drink alternatives, and no one's really talking about the impact that alcohol has on sleep and mental health. So getting into corporates and getting into schools, because I didn't have the education, and I'm not about going into the schools and going, oh, you must never drink alcohol. That's not what it's about. It's about education. And it's about going, this is what happens when you drink alcohol. So this is why you might feel anxious the next day. And this is why you might do or say things that you later regret. And no one gave me that education. No one told me what alcohol was doing to me. And so we suffer in silence. Whereas if that information is if we got that available to us from a young age, we can make informed decisions. So those are two passion projects of mine. I'm going to launch a podcast, which is more around what happens after we've removed alcohol. So how do we go on this journey of deep self-discovery and self-connection? And a book is in the making, which again is another book that is very focused on the tools that help support, with a little bit of memoirs and journeys and some case studies in there as well.
Incredible. What a year you're going to have next year. That's so, so exciting and all so well deserved, Sarah. I'm really, really happy for you.
Thank you.
There's one question that I love to finish off with when I have guests on the show. And that question is, what are your 3 non-negotiables that allow you to live a life that is happy, joyous and free in recovery?
Movement. So some kind of movement and exercise every single day is an absolute non-negotiable for me. Connection, and I mean deep, authentic connection. I don't know about you, Ash, but since I've got sober, I'm just not interested in superficial, light kind of talk. I love going deep. I love those authentic talks and really kind of knowing someone and seeing someone. And whether it's with my kids or my husband or my friends, like some kind of connection is so important to me. And sleep. Like, I have learned so much about myself. When I don't sleep, everything else doesn't work. And so prioritizing sleep, having a really good sleep routine and knowing how important that is an absolute foundational piece for me.
I couldn't agree more. All super, super important points. Now, Sarah, if our audience wants to find you, where can they go?
So I'm hanging out on Instagram a fair bit now, so that's just at Sarah Rusbatch. My free Facebook community, the Women's Wellbeing Collective, and my website, sarahrusbatch.com.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Sarah, we say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one needs suffer in silence. So thank you so, so much for being here today, for sharing your story so honestly with so much vulnerability, and for all the incredible work that you do within the sober space.
Thank you so much for having me. I love the work that you're doing, and I just love that you have a platform that allows others to know that they're not alone.
That's exactly right. I hope you have a beautiful day.
You too.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you